I'm Sarah Kavanaugh, and this is Peaceful Exit, the podcast where we talk to creatives about life and death. Basil Twist is a world-famous and celebrated puppeteer. His first project was Symphonie Fantastique, which is set to a famous 19th century composition of the same name and performed entirely underwater. And since then, he's done many different projects for opera, ballet. He's even worked in film for a minute. He helped create the Dementors in the third Harry Potter movie. He and I explore the arc of his creative career and the magic of a live show, and why audiences still crave them. We also talk about his grief when a dear mentor died. Basil explains how the conversation of death is always under the surface of almost any creative act, but especially puppetry. Welcome to Peaceful Exit.
Thank you.
Let's start with a bit of history. Did you always know you wanted to be an artist? And what drew you to the art of puppeteering?
When I eventually went to puppetry school in France and had this very impressive intellectual who wrote about puppetry named Henryk Jurkowski, and he started out with why would people do puppets and why would an artist choose puppetry as a medium? And there was different reasons why you might, metaphorically, artistically. One of the reasons you might choose to do it was because people were shy. And I found that so validating that some fancy intellectual giving the reasons for puppetry might suggest that certain performers were more inclined to it because of their comfort level being visible or being on stage, and that puppetry was a way for someone who was a little more retiring and who would hide behind the couch and stick your puppet up, that was a legitimate reason to choose puppetry. And it rang true for me. That was true for me. I found it a way to express myself and my theatrical flair, but without putting myself into vulnerable position. I could do it indirectly by hiding behind the couch and speaking through a felt creature on my hand.
I know your grandfather was a puppeteer.
Well, my grandfather was mostly a musician, a big band leader, and he used puppets as part of his act. But I never met him. He died before I was born. I think that what hit me at first was that my mother was doing puppetry when I was young. So when she moved to San Francisco, she met a group of women who were mostly mothers who had a kind of a social activity. And the social activity was the puppet club. And they made puppets and did puppet shows at hospitals and birthday parties. And of course, I was right there and backstage and got, full access to the puppets. And because I was born in 1969, so I'm squarely of the Sesame Street generations. The Muppets were also, hot on the heels of that. And there was a puppeteer in San Francisco too that I was kind of obsessed with. He was a street performer. His name was Bob Hartman. He used to perform down at Fisherman's Wharf, and I just loved him. My siblings probably had the same conditions, but it didn't hook them the way it hooked me. It was like my thing. I was a kid who I didn't want a teddy bear. I wanted a puppet. I wanted toys that I could, make come to life, not just that didn't just sit there.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about some of the puppets you made as a kid.
Made a whole series of Star Wars puppets. So that must have been 1976, 77, whenever I must have been 7 or 8 years old. In particular, I remember making those legs, pantyhose containers, those metallic plastic eggs. I made a R2-D2 puppet out of that. I remember doing like a book report in school. I had to do like a report in school, and I was shy, and I used a puppet to do the report instead. It was like a report about ancient Greece, and I think I made a toga for the dog and did my report with the puppet, which was like a coping mechanism, almost a way of dealing with public speaking. That I did it with a puppet. And of course, everybody loved it and thought it was great. And I got, high marks on my book report.
Well, fast forward to today and seeing you with the marionette. It seems like an extension of your body. It's mesmerizing. Can you talk a little bit about this particular marionette?
I call him Stickman, and he's a carved wooden marionette, meaning that he's operated on strings. And I made him when I was in school in France. So I went to this puppetry school in France. And while I was there, I met all these great puppetry masters, and the puppet is an expression of that. So I was taught by a Brazilian master named Alvaro Apocalypse how to carve the wood puppet based on a certain design. That's actually an American design called a Dwiggins style. And then I had a Swedish master teach me how to string it. Mikael Meshka taught me how to string it, and he used a certain kind of control, which is a Malaysian style control, which is an H control instead of like a Christian cross style control. And I gathered all this information in France and then made this pretty amazing puppet, but it's because it's a string marionette. It's very indirect. You don't have your hands right on it. There's strings. So you have a really delicate relationship with it, how to animate it. And it actually took me years and years and years to figure out how to do it. And now I've had that puppet for over 30 years. And yeah, he is like an extension of myself now because I'm so used to having him in my hands. But that's because I've had time with him, and also because he's actually such a good, excellent puppet, because there's all this great mastery and knowledge that's been passed down to me through that puppet.
So for our listeners, Stickman is a slender wooden puppet in human form. There's no paint on him. There's a simple expression, and he has very graceful movements with long legs connected to the marionette strings. I highly recommend going to Basil's website to see a video of him maneuvering Stickman. We'll put a link in the show notes. How did you learn to express emotion through Stickman?
Oh, I don't know how you learn that, actually. It comes out in practice. When I was in France, I became aware of all this other artists, and one of them was the painter and sculptor Alberto Giacometti, who makes those really long, skinny sculpture figures, and I wanted to make my puppet like that. And then it had a quality already in it. So it had a certain quality in it, but it mostly revealed itself to me over time.
So in any of your productions, has there been a death scene or a representation of death? And what did that look like?
When I share that puppet, what I share is sort of a mini life cycle, so that the puppet starts as an inert pile of sticks and it comes to life. And at the end of the performance, he'll arch his back and throw his head back and make a beautiful kind of shape with his body. And then I'll lift him up and pull him with a string so he lifts to my hand. And then he's back to being a limp doll. So that is always an expression of, something coming to life and then returning to its maker in a way. But that question of something being alive or not alive, and the veil between those two states, is, I think, what puppetry actually pushes right elegantly in front of us to consider.
You're animating something that's inanimate.
And the question of spirit, and spirit being in something or expressing itself through something and then leaving something, and what's left behind. These are all kind of, big mysterious questions that actually make puppetry be a pretty profound. It's part of what gets people about puppetry, that they're not quite aware of how it's touching them so deeply, but it always does.
I know you've worked on many wonderful projects. My Neighbor Totoro, working with the Pacific Northwest Ballet, The Rite of Spring, and operas. But Symphonie Fantastique was one of your first big shows that you created. It's an hour-long show set to a famous 19th century composition of the same name, and it's completely underwater. The puppeteers in their wetsuits manipulate feathers, dyes, blacklight, bubbles, all sorts of amazing things within this giant water tank. I have a very vivid memory of going backstage and just seeing the engineering that was required behind the scenes, which was fabulous. And then standing with you in the alley and watching the water be drained out the hose into the alley, just so much water. I just have this wonderful memory, New York at night and the draining of the tank.
Yes. Special needs of that show.
Yes. Yeah. What was it like revisiting a show that you did so much earlier in your career?
20 years before, we had done it in the little theater downstairs. Now we were in the slightly bigger theater upstairs. And we also had a slightly bigger tank than when we did it, because the show had had a history. And in the show's history, it also had moved from being with recorded music to eventually I had started working with this wonderful pianist, Christopher O'Reilly. So it had live music. So it was exciting to bring it back to the same address, but have more audience seeing it, bigger tank, and live music. When you revisit something, especially anytime you do something again, and it was really good the first time, you're always a little worried, like, I hope it's as good. It was so good then, why would I want to mess with it? And it fortunately was really well received and showed up well in that space, I think.
Talking about Symphonie Fantastique is making me think of your grandmother. Because when I interviewed your mom about death and money, she shared a story of her mom, your grandmother, and her letters to the grandkids at the end of her life.
I was communicating with my grandmother a lot at that point because the theater where Symphonie Fantastique opened was named after her, and she was a part of that. And she came and cut the ribbon for opening, the opening of the show in the theater. And then she passed away a couple months later, 2 months later. So I was in touch with Dorothy. I just know that she was especially proud of me, and I had gone and spent time with her at her home in Palm Springs. And I remember I was working on Symphonie Fantastique, and she had a swimming pool, and I had fabric in the swimming pool, and she's like, oh, here's this fabric. She brought out stuff. She just was really, very supportive of me. And she gave me my grandfather's puppets when I was 10, which really sealed the deal in many ways. So my relationship with my grandmother was strong and important, and it was particularly important close to her death. I did this show that I had worked on in her swimming pool, and then it was at a theater that was named after her, and she cut the ribbon. I mean, it was a big, really binding to me and my grandmother, and that theater still exists. And one of my cousins is in town in New York today. I'm like, hey, you should come and see Grandma's theater.
I'm remembering the puppets in that theater. Were those your grandfather's puppets that are in the glass cases?
In the glass case with little tuxedos on.
Yeah. Oh,
she gave those to me when I was 10. I made a trip down to Palm Springs on my own. I think I took the train, and she picked me up, and then she showed me this old trunk and these kind of beat up bags, and they had these amazing kind of spooky antique puppets in them. And she gave them to me. Then I had them in my childhood bedroom, these kind of sort of spooky old puppets. And they're almost too big for me to work. They were string marionettes, so you had to be kind of tall to work them. Anyway, that was major.
From your perspective as an artist, how do we get more comfortable talking about death?
I frequently will speak to that aspect of puppetry that connects us to the mystery. So the mystery of being alive and something not being alive. So I think that simply engaging in the mystery, like engaging in the sort of the reverence for, oh, this is alive. Let's pay attention to that. How specific that is, how finite that is. So there's to that people create works that actually address the subject. I know that I have colleagues who have done that have created shows. I have a friend who made actually a beautiful, I was surprised how beautiful it was. There's a piece about his grandmother who was passing. She chose to die. He said, I'm going to die today and we're going to have a party. And they did a piece about it with a puppet representing her. And it was so moving. And it was so touching when the puppet was complete with being performed. That was one way to kind of bring us closer to that conversation. But I think it's always under the surface of almost any creative act, actually, but in particular puppetry, is this idea of spirit and life and then the mystery of being alive and honoring that.
I would love to help people appreciate this art form as you have done so brilliantly in your career. And there are many popular works with puppetry at the center. Can you describe your work for the third Harry Potter movie?
Oh, well, so yes, I was part of the film The Prisoner of Azkaban, and the wonderful director Alfonso Cuarón was the director of that. And some people say it's the best of the Harry Potter movies. Alfonso he'd seen my Stickman puppet, and he at a party I was performing at, and then he came to see Symphonie Fantastique, my underwater puppet show. And he invited me to participate in the Harry Potter film because he wanted to have more puppetry and magic than just computers doing things. So I did the Dementors, which are these spooky black ghost-like characters that suck your life energy. And we did them underwater with fabric underwater and made miniatures of them and did them in a big tank and made them and filmed them underwater. Eventually they did it all with computers, because it ultimately is easier to do that. It's hard to make a puppet, it's on wires and it's in a tank. And if you want it to go upside down, well, you have to get in the tank. So it's easier to film it, get the style of the movement, and then to recreate that with computers. But that's what I did on the Harry Potter.
How has technology impacted your work over the years and the craft?
Puppetry is a low-tech world. It's an analog world, and it's best that way. I was trained and trained myself making stuff out of legs, pantyhose containers, and cardboard, and making things and thinking with my hands and bringing stuff to life with my hands. So there's something that's happened actually concurrent with my career as technology has become so majorly part of our lives in terms of the devices and the screens and the the access to knowledge and and connectivity is like completely mind-blowing and hard to wrap our heads around. And there's something about the purity of magic that happens with Stickman, with his pieces of wood and his strings. And when he comes to life and people are, their eyes well up with tears or they hold their breaths, there's something about it that I think is all the more potent for people because they're so overwhelmed by technology. That technology somehow makes us thirsty for those more primal, elemental connection with spirit and magic. That puppetry connects us more directly to it than a computer does. There is a place where technology can be applied to puppetry, like in 3D printing, or there's ways that it's helpful, but it's more that puppetry as a non-tech form, as a low-tech form, somehow rises in value as we're so inundated by technology that the low techness of puppetry becomes even more refreshing, even more necessary, even more nourishing.
I love that. And that makes me think about our earlier in this conversation, we were talking about how puppets can express emotion, but there's something about the three dimensions of being in a theater, being live, that there's a different energy to it. And I love what you said.
And puppetry invites us to, you have to, when you saw those horses in Warhorse, you knew that they're made out of wood and leather. You can see it. And you can even see the puppeteers. But you're overwhelmed with memories about when you rode a horse when you were a kid, or when your grandmother used to have horses, or how horses have or have not been in your life. It's like all of that, you bring that. You experience that, you show up with that. So the thing that's just made out of leather and wood becomes something so much more because of what you bring to it. And that happens in the live theater and in puppetry, where sometimes people call it the suspension of disbelief. I think it's not the suspension of disbelief. I think it's belief. You believe. You actually believe in something, even though despite the information that you see the strings and you can see the person, you believe in it. That's totally magical.
I love what you say about us being thirsty for those experiences. And do you feel like in our modern culture, you're fighting for the art of puppetry a little bit, like keeping it alive?
I mean, it is sometimes a fight because I feel like when I'm advocating within a big show that people don't know about puppets and I have to advocate, but I'm not fighting other than just trying to do my work, trying to do my work. Things lined up for me where my grandmother gave me those puppets and I lucked out and went to this amazing French puppet school. And these were the spectacular cards I was dealt. And so I'm playing my hands, which is being a puppeteer. I'm so lucky to do it. And aware of how special and important it is. In Totoro, it's really important. The puppetry that's how you get Totoro, how you get that character. It's not because of the actors, it's the puppets brought to life by the performers. That brings that spirit, that presence of that spirit, real presence, which is more than you can get in a film. When you get that presence in live theater, it's really overwhelming.
We talked a little bit about aging on that bench in Seattle.
Yeah.
What's it like for you to be an aging artist?
For a long time, I lived in a sort of Peter Pan way where I was a kid, and I still have that quality about myself, I know, but I am not what is termed an emerging artist. I have emerged. People know me. I've made my mark. And I'm doing shows now, I'm doing like the 20th anniversary remount of Symphonie Fantastique, 20th anniversary remount of Dogu Gayashi. I look with some distance at what it was like when I was young and full of ideas and full of energy to make my mark, and marvel at how that was and how there's something different going on now, which is I also I want contentment. I want a sort of peaceful existence, not the fight of being a young artist and making your way. I'm lucky that I've had enough opportunity that I'm feel in a comfortable place. But I'm also, I wonder as an older artist, what's next? What's important? What I want to do? What I want to create, as opposed to how I just want to participate with other projects. But what do I want to create? Noticing I don't have the same drive, missing it, wanting when I see parts of that, I am coming to accepting that I am an older artist and what that means for my art and also how I relate to the world.
Yeah. A lot of people talk about aging as like having limitations or losing like the physical ability to hop on top of the tank or whatever it is. But but I wonder, I find you very positive, creative. Like what's the joy of getting older as an artist?
I guess it's knowing yourself, knowing how you've done it, or knowing that you can do it. I know how to get there, and we're going to do it now. And having that confidence thing, as opposed to the sort of hubris of a young artist who's like, I know how to get there, let me through, and they're and they crash through and maybe end up someplace else, but they got there. This is a different thing of knowing yourself, knowing how you work, which is also still mysterious to convey.
So in Peaceful Exit, we talk a lot about your personal story around death. And in the arc of your life so far, have there been any significant losses that have kind of informed how you think about death?
So Lee Nagrin was an important friend and collaborator and mentor of mine. She was a performance artist in New York before anybody knew what that was. And she had this incredible artistic life in New York City from the 50s on, and was part of many fascinating, cool pure New York arts moments. And I created a show with her called Behind the Lid. This poster that's behind me is from Behind the Lid. And it was her life story. And she fell ill while we were working on the project. And I had to pivot and recreate the project, have puppets of her in the show about her and myself. And I did create this show and performed it in her loft space where she had lived and worked for years. And she went into the hospital and she passed away while the show was running, and the show became a sort of a celebration of her life. I really felt myself like it was like she was passing a torch to me. This torch of this, a really actually specific way of treating the live theater experience as almost like something sacred, like a religion, like this sacred experience that we did this work. Lee immensely impressed that upon me about the work the work. Just being an artist and being an artist meant making art and just doing it and creating it. And sometimes that took years and years and years. And that I participated with her on that. And then also that the big show that we worked on together marked the end of her life. And then I continued performing the show and celebrating her life. That was an incredible experience and a great privilege. It also happened, now I'm kind of realizing too, it was very close to when my grandfather passed away. So my grandfather, who I'm named after, passed away also right around that time. And I was with him when he passed away. So I was actually with my family. We were sitting around his hospital bed when he flew away. And I remember how incredible that moment was and how blessed I felt by my grandfather, that he was a key moment in terms of my experiencing death, experiencing people I knew dying, and also how that, with Lee in particular, how it impacted me as an artist. And I know with my grandfather too, my grandfather was so mean and supportive of me. He helped build the tank for Symphonie Fantastique. He was an engineer, so he was really into the tank and how it got built near him in Central California, so he could help be a part of it. This is my father's father, as opposed to my mother's father, who was the big band leader. So I've had this great. I'm so fortunate to have had grandparents who supported me and also celebrated me in my accomplishments, in my unique accomplishments.
What does a peaceful exit mean to you?
I mean, the way my grandfather went was definitely peaceful. He had lived a full life. His kids were all in great shape. But when he passed away, it was very easy. We were around him. He passed away before midnight. It was very practical. And then we could all go and sleep in our beds. And it was beautiful. I mean, incredibly beautiful, because I got to be there, and my father and my mother and my brother. His breathing slowed down, and then it got slower and slower, and then it stopped. It was a total miracle to be present to. I would call that a peaceful exit that I experienced with him.
Thank you for listening to Peaceful Exit. I'm your host, Sarah Kavanaugh. You can find me on Instagram at @peacefulexit, and you can learn more about this podcast at peacefulexit.net. Our senior producer is Katie Klein, and our sound engineer is Sean Simmons. This episode was edited by Sydney Gladue. Additional support from Cindy Gall and Sierra Austin. Original music provided by Ricardo Russell, with additional music and sounds from Blue Dot Sessions. If you'd like to support our show, please follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Rate and review us wherever you listen. It really does make a difference. And as always, thank you so much for listening.